Hello and welcome. This is Estro Garu, and I hope you're doing well today. Um, I'm doing super great. It's an amazing day. I'm actually sitting in the park today. I decided to, well, actually, I didn't really plan. I just had my, equipments with me, and I had my some of my notes with me, and I just thought, yeah, I might as well, just take this opportunity to, do some work. Seeing that it's quite peaceful here, and it's just a lovely day, and the weather's amazing. Um, yeah, I do apologize if there's too much maybe music in the background. Actually, there's a concert going on somewhere. I can't quite see it, but it must be so close because the echo is, coming all the way to the park. But they're all over now. I mean, summer is here, so it's like festivals and concerts all over the place. So yeah, but yeah, I also, hear birds, chipping and singing, and yeah, the wind is blowing, ever so lightly. So that's nice for a change because all the other recordings were done inside. So maybe this kind of breaks the routine a little bit. And speaking of routine, actually today we are focusing on the sixth house. Which is the house of daily routines, the house of work, the house of health, also the house of you know service to others. And yes, what that means is that this is part of a 12 series recording where I talk about houses in astrology. I talk about what they symbolize, the meaning behind it, and also what it means to have certain types of energies and certain types of vibrations in a particular house, how that impacts certain aspects of your life. So, so this is what this recording is going to be about. If you haven't watched, the recording on the fifth house, the fourth, third, and second and first, I definitely recommend that you do. It might be helpful and it might be, beneficial, to sort of get a more complete, a more complete story, sort of like how each house transitions into the next, and the benefits or implications that can come with that. Yeah, so I've pretty much done the introductions, it seems. Also, there's like a whole lot of other stuff that I've talked about. I've talked about elemental influences. I've talked about, the qualities of the different signs, the groupings in terms of like their cardinality, in terms of their fixation, and also their mutability. So there's definitely quite a lot, that I've posted. I've talked about deacons. I've talked about, major aspects and so forth, and basically what that means. And also planets. So yeah, there's quite a lot. If this is, of course, of interest to you, I definitely recommend you checking those out as well. And one more thing before we get started, just want to say. Um, Definitely thank you for the support, and thank you for commenting, thank you for sharing and liking, and definitely means a lot, and it helps definitely to show that there is interest, and also to sort of see where I can improve, and how I can do this differently, and also by sharing you could put some inputs and some perspectives that perhaps I was not able to kind of see. So yeah. So with that said, I think I'm gonna dive right in, and yeah, we'll talk about the sixth house. So I when I think about the sixth house, yeah, well, I'm just thinking the last recording I did, which was about the fifth house, and I'm just wondering if what I can say or that will sort of like top up the fifth house. I mean, the house of fun and arts and creativity, and so yeah, I don't know. The sixth house for me maybe is not um, the most exciting, but of course it's also one of the most important because of course it talks about um, our work. It talks about the type of work styles that we bring forward. It also talks about, since we're on the topic of work, it also indicates what types of relationships we are bound to have with our colleagues, how we respond to maybe our supervisors or managers, things of that nature. So yeah, so it's a little bit maybe more serious in that sense, but it's also um, the house of like routines. Speaking of routines, I'm actually glad that I kind of broke away from the usual routine of doing the recordings indoors. I think it's quite fitting that now, with a change of routine happens when we're actually doing the sixth house. But also routines again. Speaking of routines, has to do with routines also at home. This may include things like cleaning or cooking, or just preparing and organizing the home. Especially if you've got like Cancer in your sixth house, that would be sort of like the Cancerian energy would kind of draw a lot of that energy towards home, or at least towards nurturance. And if you had to kind of apply that to your work, like in terms of like going to a like an office work or something, it would also show that you have a more kind of a nurturing way of doing your work. You nurture projects, you kind of feel your way through different ideas and different projects and different things that are sort of like presented. And there's also a sense of wanting to have it like organized. And your workspace also might be something that you would like for it to have a feeling of like homeness, like a homey type of feeling. You might want to have a homey type of a vibe in your workspace as well. So yeah, that's what happens when you have, like, for example, Cancer in your sixth house. Other examples, when I think about, well, if you have Gemini there, for example, you might be somebody who might enjoy doing, several. You might, first of all, be a good multitasker, and also somebody who enjoys doing several projects, engaging several projects at a time, at the same time, or even doing two or three jobs, two or three different jobs at the same time, because you just have the ability to divide your energy and your time um, that much better than somebody who may have Taurus, for example, in the sixth house. They may not be as flexible. Um, what they will have though is consistency and a lot of perseverance and dedication. So they'll always see through that the work gets done in a very professional professional way, and that everything was fact checked. Every detail was fact checked, especially if it's even a Virgo, particularly a Virgo, because they're quite perfectionistic. So those are things that they'll be kind of like obsessing over, a little bit. um, but Taurus, of course, might be a workaholic, but might not have kind of like the same ability like a Gemini to do maybe two or three jobs at the same time, or multiple projects at the same time. It takes a lot of dedication and a lot of effort for them to do that. And it could also be that it's something that they will only start doing much later on in their life, because it's not something that's innate. It's not like a natural talent, so to speak. um, so yeah, and then this is also seeing that this is the house of health. It kind of also shows our sort of like our predispositions in terms of what types of health issues or conditions we may have like inherited from our parents. um, and if you have a house that already makes, if you have like an energy in there that sort of makes it even more worse for you to sort of become susceptible to whatever that illness might be, then you become even more of a, how should I word it? You become even more of a target, towards that illness or that disease or whatever condition it might be. So As an example, let's say your parents may have had, maybe one of your parents may have had issues with, like, arthritis. So it's something that's already like in the family. It's like it's in the genes, for example. And so, um, and then you were born, you and, some of, if you have like a sibling, for example, were born, and you have, let's say, the sign of Capricorn, you know. Um, in the sixth house, Capricorn rules over the knees, Um, so it's possible for people who have like Capricornian energy to have like knee problems or like joint problems like arthritis and things of that nature. Um, and even also Gemini, because also Gemini rules like the fingers and the hands, so those joints there, those connected, parts. So that also might indicate, but I think more so maybe to the Capricorn. That might be more so than the Gemini energy, but that's like an indication. So if one of the sibling has that Capricornian influence, in the sixth house, and one of their parents had, diabetes, then that particular sibling might be more susceptible than another sibling who has maybe no planets in the sixth house, or they have, um, cancer, or they have um, Aquarius, in the sixth house. So, for instance, when they have those, they may have other health issues, but they may not have like the arthritis thing because the energy or the vibrations of the planets sort of maybe allowed them or blessed them so that it kind of skipped them. But it got one of the other sibling, but not the other, and so that's why you would find conditions where sometimes a sibling inherits a certain type of condition, and then the other ones are fine. Someone in the family has cancer, but it passes over, some other siblings, and then one of the other sibling has it. So when you look at somebody's, birth chart and natal chart, you might be able to see some of this, some of these predispositions and susceptibilities as well. So it is the house of hell. So these are things that, like, when I'm doing someone's chart, I would look for those, for those, yeah, for those indications. Um, and what else do I have here? I talked about the thing with like with colleagues and relationship dynamics. It's quite Oh yeah, actually this is something that it's quite important to mention, because this is something that although I personally don't always like the sixth house very much, it's not one of my favorite houses, but like I said, it's actually really important because this is where we kind of spend most of our time, whether it's by our own choosing or whether it's um, whether it just happens to be the case. And the reason why that is because this is where the action takes place. This is, like I said, it's the house of work. So going to work every day is like sixth house, cleaning and doing chores, it's also sixth house. Going out and doing, errands and getting groceries, for the household, these are also like sixth house things, driving your kids to school, all of this, like, sort of like day-to-day routines are things that are like sixth house things. So it's quite an active house in that sense, that even if you don't have any planets there, society still forces you to somehow engage your sixth house. And um, if you have a client who comes to you, or this might resonate to somebody who, let's say, for example, you have a lot of problems. You always have problems like at work with, certain colleagues. There's always something about, your energy or other people's energy that always doesn't kind of vibe very well together. This to me also indicates, planets in your sixth house that are maybe not in harmony with other people's, sixth house. This is like very, very common. So you might find yourself always, getting work opportunities, or um, may have had many years of this type of thing happening to you, where you end up in a job or like a work environment, and then you realize that you're always going from one workplace to another, and always feeling like you haven't quite found your sort of like your place, in the workplace. There's always just something about a particular unit that doesn't, vibe very well with you, or certain colleagues that just don't vibe very well with you, and you're always just wondering like what is it that always makes this sort of like this tension, you know to exist. And then, one day in your late 40s or 30s, or sometimes even earlier, in your 20s, depending on how awake you are and how self-aware you are, you eventually find yourself in a work environment where it just clicks. The colleagues are just perfect, the energy just, everything is just in harmony, or it complements each other. Um, so if someone is having issues with like their professional life, um, the sixth house is like a very important house to look at, as well, from astrologically or even psychologically, if you combine psychology and astrology like I do. So definitely shows quite a lot of, the professional challenges that, somebody might have. I can also relate to this in some ways. I've had, workplaces or work colleagues where some places just it worked better, it clicked better, and other places, something just, was off energetically, psychically, and so you always want to check out for that, and usually it has to do with what is in the other people's, sixth house. And even sometimes also you might find that like the sixth house is fine. Like, let's say, as an example, let's say you and one of your colleagues have a similar planet or similar energy in your sixth house, and so you should be compatible, right? In terms of like, at least in terms of harmony within the workspace. But then the other tricky point becomes the third house, because remember also the third house is connected to your sixth house, because um, these are the house of Gemini. So we're talking about like fixed houses. So the sixth house is connected to the house of communication, which is the third house. So there might be a problem there. So it feels okay energetically because you have something similar in your sixth house. But then when it comes to communication, or the way that information is shared, for example, there's always a clash, ideas, because you may have like an Aquarian energy in your third house. So you might find yourself having more, like, more or less like unconventional, unusual, eccentric ideas as it pertains to like, work, or like doing work or communicating ideas at work. And then another colleague of yours might have, let's say, Capricornian influence there, where they're more traditional in their views, and they just want to go with things that have been, done and tested and proven to be, successful, and might not be as, risk taking. Or even Aries there might be a little bit more louder and more boastful, and, with their ideas, and might want to take more risk than somebody who has Capricorn there. And this is now in terms of communication and so forth. So again, this is where you start to see those where those some of those discrepancies and those tensions can start to arise, when it comes to work. And So definitely an important house to look for in that sense, when you're looking at somebody's professional life and some of the challenges that they might have. And again, of course, you need to have planets there. Well, no, actually, you don't need to, but that's usually what happens when you have planets there. The house gets overly activated, and so throughout your throughout your life, experiences, or through as you go through life, you're always going to find that you are like drawn to the activities of that house. Whether the planets are positively aspected or negatively aspected, you're always going to be drawn to the activities of that, sixth house. But one other interesting thing also is if you don't have planets there and it's totally empty, um, as far as work is concerned, or even just like hobbies and daily routines and things like that, um, could indicate, if, because remember I think this was in the fifth house recording, where I talked about, where I gave the analogy of having a big ass house with like a big, living room, and you have, a big, kitchen, and multiple rooms and so forth. And so um, then you have this one spare room, down the hallway. Like, there's no furniture in there. The windows are so small, like nobody wants to use it, because it doesn't get enough lighting. And so it's just empty. And so everyone in the house basically just walks past, this empty house. They go to the living room because that's where the TV is. That's where the, home theater is, and, or they go to the kitchen because that's where the food is, the drinks and everything, or they would go to the bedroom because that's where rest and sleep is, or the bathroom, that's where you shower, you know. But then this room that's vacant, that has no furniture, has no sufficient lighting, just gets ignored. It has no energy, it has no vibration, it's neutral, it's still. And so because of that, the house does not have enough potential to pull you in. So as you go through, you know, months or years, living in this house, ignoring this house, it's gathering dust because it's been so inactive. There's no energy, there's nothing pulling it, you know. Um, this is what happens also when you have someone who has like an empty sixth house. Their activities of the sixth house become a little bit compromised. So these are people who may, for quite a long period of time in their life, especially if they have. No, never mind that thought. But these are people who, when they go through life, they just might have difficulties with like being organized in terms of their like work to like their day-to-day activities or their work life, because there's just nothing there that pulls them in, and there's no, there isn't the influence of Saturn to give them, any discipline. So these are people, you might call them up to do something, and they'll, half dedicate, they'll say they'll do it and then they don't show up, or they just don't commit to anything. They're always late, dropping off their kids to school because, they missed the alarm, or, they forgot something, just always something to do with like the day to day just doesn't, um, it just doesn't click for them, and it's not really like they're doing. It's just the way that the planets and the energy kind of plays out. Unfortunately, that was the karma that they sort of came into this world with. At the time that they were born, that's how the energy and the planets were determined. So when I see these clients, and I see these people, coming to me and asking, I mean, you can clearly see the frustration. Like, they really want to change. It really annoys them that they're always late, to pick up the kids from school, or, dropping them off at school, or it frustrates them that they want to work out, but they just can't stick to the training program. They go to the gym for 1 or 2 days, and then they just don't have the commitment or the motivation to sort of like go back and continue, and then they come to therapy, or they come for a reading, and obviously I can see the frustration. They just don't understand, how can they stop this from happening? Like, how can they be more structured? How can they be, you know but it's not their doing. It's just that there is no energy in the sixth house. There's nothing to pull them there. It's neutral, it's empty. So when you have friends, or somebody, or people who are like that, it's possible that you're looking at somebody who may have um, an empty house, or a sleeping house, sixth house particularly, because it affects their area of work, service to other, and you can see the example I was giving about being late to pick up their kids or dropping off their kids also shows their lack of commitment and their lack of dedication towards committing to others, to being of service to others and their kids in this instance. Um, or even other people who may invite them to do something, or like a gig or project, and then they just don't show up. So, um, So yeah, you're looking at somebody who has an inactive, sixth house when you meet people like that. Sometimes also procrastinators. But I think that people who are procrastinators might, more often than not, I think it's more a thing of that the planets in the sixth house are just maybe poorly aspected, because you can see that it's like the desire to want to do the thing, whatever it is the thing might be, is like it's there, but there's just something that maybe that like Saturn is in there, because wherever Saturn is, like it puts restriction, it puts like limitations until at least the age of like 30 to 35 or so. And so it's like a really slow moving process, and so the individual might find themselves being maybe doubtful about whatever this thing is that they want to do, and so they're just like putting it off, or procrastinating. But that's usually because of like a planet or an energy that's poorly aspected, not because it's empty. If it's empty, they just don't do it. Period. Um, but then again, that's not to say that they are people who are doomed, so to speak. It's just that the way we define work ethic and the way that we define work, the traditional way of defining work is that you wake up in the morning, you go to work at 8 or 9, you do your shift, your thing, you're done at 4 or 5, you come back home and repeat the cycle. That's kind of like the traditional way that we've sort of like defined somebody who's hardworking, and somebody who actually works. That's like the traditional way that we've sort of like defined it for so long. And so when we use that same definition and apply it to somebody who has no houses in the sixth house, we just call them lazy. Lazy, unfocused, no direction, no purpose whatsoever. But like I said, like it's not all doom. This can actually be salvaged by the individual's third house. Um, but I would say probably more so the individual's ninth house, again, because the sixth house is connected to the third, it's connected to the ninth. Um, well, of course, it's connected to the sixth because it's the sixth. So it's connected to the third, the ninth, and the 12th, including the sixth itself. So four houses. Um, and remember, I talked briefly about the ninth house being the house of like, it's the house of Jupiter, like, the happy-go-lucky house. It's like, happy-go-lucky, careless nature of, Jupiter, playful, flirtatious, fun. Um, but it's also the house that kind of deals with things that has to do with like foreign culture, foreign people, foreign food, long distance traveling, higher education. So if this individual is lucky enough, like if their sixth house is totally empty and it's neutral and there's nothing happening there, but they have a great ninth house that's positively aspected, this individual might be somebody who maybe moves to another country, um, and then that just transforms their life, because then through moving to another country they learn more about themselves, or like they also learn more about that country's culture, that country's people, the food, and so their experience becomes something that they then turn into their job. Either they start making YouTube videos, or writing blogs, or writing articles or writing books. Even like we've seen these types of people. I think we're even seeing it more now, like in our modern times, like people who are just like travelers, and they travel all over the world, and they make reviews of different places and hotels where they've stayed, and what they've learned about the culture and the people and so forth. So, like, we see this and we're seeing it more and more. And so, these are things that they've sort of like made into their work or made into their profession or their career, so to speak. And so, that kind of saves the sixth house, or it compensates for their sixth house. So, they don't now sort of go to work in the sort of traditional way, like I said, like from 8 to 4 and 8 to 5, and then have the lunch break at 1 or 12 or whatever. Um, they're engaging in their ninth house activities, but it profits them in a way that appears to be like a career or a job. And so it indirectly benefits an empty sixth house. you know. So these are some ways in which, you know, the sixth house can be, saved through other houses. And this again, this is the interconnectedness and the transition I was talking about from one house to the other. And so it's never doomed. It's never all hope is lost. If a house is empty, it might benefit from another house. But it could also be like on a more negative side. Um, if the ninth house, but even if the ninth house was also empty, this person will still draw influence from other houses, even houses that are not necessarily connected to the directly connected to the sixth house, might still be houses that the individual might, draw inspiration from. Um, so that's also possible. So like no hope is totally lost, but it just becomes more difficult if the planets are not always like in your favor. um, and that's not to say it's also bad either, because that could be your karma, that could be like your life lesson, that could be, you know your calling, your purpose, because maybe you were meant to travel and explore different places and explore different cultures and share that experience with other people, and sort of also inspire other people to do that, sort of like awaken the ninth house, of other people, and show them that like the ninth house can also be a house of work. It can compensate for an empty sixth house, or it can compensate for a poorly, aspected, sixth house. So um, never all hope is lost. So yeah, so that's just an example to show the connection between the houses, and also just um, how they kind of, feed off of each other, so to speak. Um, and did I have something else here? Oh, this is also seen as the house of pets. So if you know somebody who has pets, like cats or dogs or things of that nature, it could be that they also have an active sixth house, and particularly if they have like Gemini influence in their sixth house, this shows an individual who may have like small pets. Like if you see somebody walking down the street and they have like a Chihuahua or something of that nature, might indicate like, some Gemini influence there in their sixth house. And also sort of like the same concept would apply if it was like Sagittarian energy, speaks to like, like bigger pets, like a bigger dog, or, something of that nature, or even also like, I would say someone who likes to have like, who has like an aquarium, like fish, like, collecting fish and stuff, could also be like a Pisces type of influence there. Um, yeah, but generally, someone having pets shows or indicates also quite an active, like, sixth house. There has to be some planets there. But there could also be somebody who has planets there but does not, like pets. um, so it's not always a given. But those are just some, examples. Like, let's say, for example, maybe somebody who has Virgo. Uh, Someone who has like Virgo in their sixth house maybe might not like pets, because like Virgo is like the sign of cleanliness and health, and maybe on the more negative side they can be a little bit like hypochondria, like they don't want to like touch things and they're afraid to get like diseases and things of that nature, especially if it's like a poorly aspected Virgo energy, so they might associate having pets and animals as like dirty and filthy, and that they just, they carry germs, and so they don't want to have anything to do with that, you know. So that's one way in which you can still have planets in the sixth house, or energy in the sixth house, and still not want to have pets. um, and then another example could be somebody who has, you know, they might get pets because it activates something else, like it activates a different house. So again, this person might have an empty sixth house, that has absolutely nothing going for it, no energy, no vibration, totally neutral. Um, but might still have the desire to have a pet because it triggers something in their fourth house, the house of family, So, for example, this person might be have gone maybe through some traumatic things, like traumatic childhood things that led to certain attitudes and values and beliefs about close relationships, or having family even. And so for them, getting a pet is like it becomes like something that compensate the presence of family members to sort of fill that void. And so then these pets become treated almost as humans in a way, this is maybe a little bit more extreme case, and we have seen this where some people have pets and that's fine. They just, they see it really as just pets. They give them the love and the respect and the care that, like any other living being should be, But then we've also seen people who really take it like overboard, the dog or the cat or whatever the pet may be, gets, manicures and, gets, special designer clothes and, gets trimmed every other month. And, it's just, that's sort of like where to a point where the pet is almost treated as if they're kind of human in a way. And I mean, of course, I am not one to say that that's like a good thing or like a bad thing, but it's just like an observation. So that could be like a fourth house, more of a fourth house influence than it might be like a sixth house influence, because in that case, it fills a void, it compensates for the presence of maybe a human being instead. And so it replaces that. So that's another example also where somebody might have a pet even though their sixth house is empty. Um, yeah, so but that's it, I think, about the sixth house. I think I've mentioned some examples about service to others, about health, about work, and it's also the house of pets. I've just talked about that. And what else is there? So again, just to sum it up, yeah, we're looking at somebody's sense of responsibility, someone's commitment, someone's dedication. We're also looking at their physical health, and how reliable they are. Their sense of reliability, and again, service to others. And also their work environment. What type of work environment they have. The work dynamic. Close friends. Close colleagues and stuff like that. So. Um, yeah, pretty much that's what it was about, or the sixth house is about. And oh, the body parts that it rules the intestines, and also the organs of elimination. Um, so if maybe negatively aspected, these individuals might have, fluid retention problems or digestion issues, problems to do with like the intestines, or like maybe cancerous intestines, or cancer in those sort of like, body parts. Um, and organs of elimination, yeah, of course, like I was saying, yeah, organs of elimination also could indicate somebody who might have, susceptibility or the predisposition to suffer like quite a lot from, constipation, like especially when they're like stressed out. For these individuals, it might show itself maybe through constipation. Um, yeah, but then maybe on a more positive and maybe a little bit more silly, silly way of looking at it. Also, as organs of elimination could be a source of pleasure for these individuals, they might not openly admit it, but having their organs of elimination, like maybe touched or stroked or played with or whatever, could for some people also be something that's like pleasurable. Yeah, so I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. I think if there's just one more thing I would say to conclude this, I think I would just say, like, the sixth house, seeing that it's also like the house of Virgo, and the house, of service to others. So if it's like very, very heavily activated, like if it's very loaded, the one thing I've noticed with these individuals is that they are individuals who a lot of time um, struggle with like establishing healthy boundaries. or limits, and they tend to be taken advantage of quite a lot, actually. They're sort of like giving nature. Their generosity and kind-heartedness is something that either people take for granted, or they just really just straight up take advantage of it. And so these are people who would come to therapy incredibly like exhausted and incredibly worn out, from years and years and years of just being of service to others and just giving and giving, of their life force energy, to a point where they're just totally depleted, and they may even end up being quite resentful in their old age, because they just feel like they've just been giving and giving and giving, but not like receiving. So uh you want to look at those clients and also see sort of like what's happening in their sixth house. And I think one of their life lessons is to learn to be a little bit more assertive, and to have healthier boundaries, and to sort of like set more healthier, limits. Um, and it's going to be really hard for them, for these individuals, because the people that sort of like stand to benefit from them obviously will resist, because they know that like once they assert themselves, the benefactors will not, be receiving their energy anymore, or their attention anymore, or their time anymore. So there's always going to be this push and pull where they might want to be assertive or change something about themselves, but there's always going to be resistance, either from their kids, because obviously, like I'm saying, they benefit from their kindness or their generosity. Um, and also, this could apply, for example, in the workplace, where this is so funny. Someone just came to mind, but I'm not, yeah, no names. But this can also happen, especially at work, where you just have this really, really good colleague who has always come to work for the past 30 years, always on time, always does their work in a particular manner, in an ordered manner, you know and sometimes stays too much, like in the office. They do overtime, it's just like, they've been doing that so consistently and so perfectly and so well, for 30 years, for this particular organization. And then one day they're like, I'm just exhausted, I'm just tired. And then they want to resign, or retire. And the organization just goes into a state of panic, because it's like, you know this person has come to mean so much, to the organization, or to the unit, or whatever, that now they themselves asserting themselves and saying, hey, this is it, I've had enough, that's it, I'm done, I'm exhausted, is met with resistance. And now, the boss is like, oh, should we give you an increase, or what can we do to make it, more convenient? You just can't leave, so it's this type of situations. But I think they just eventually just have to put their feet down and just say, hey, enough is enough, I need to go now, or I just need to do something different, or I'm exhausted, I need a break, yeah. So mosquitoes here all over. I'm trying to save myself. So yeah, so that's the life lesson of like sixth house people. They're like some of the nicest people you'll really find. I mean, Virgo influence people are like really, really nice. So yeah, I think I'm gonna leave the sixth house there. I think I've pretty much given you the key to your sixth house. If there's something that comes up at a later stage, I'll like do like an extended version, and I'll post that up. And yeah, if there's something that you guys have experienced, in terms of the sixth house, something that maybe I forgot to mention, please do share that in the comment section. And yeah, tell me more. Tell me, what planets do you have there, and do you have any planets, and in what sign the planets are in? You know, is your sixth house a good house? Has it given you trouble? Yeah, please do let me know. And once again, thank you so much, thank you for the support. Thank you for taking time to listen to this, and thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking or disliking, and for commenting. Absolutely appreciate it. It means a lot. And I think with that said, I'm gonna sign this one off and do the seventh house. I probably will do the seventh house here as well in the park, because it's still so nice here out. Um, So yeah, so I think I'll sign out of this one and then I'll do the seventh house. So see you in the next. Ciao.